Repeat that call sign now. The CEO's voice cut through the glass-walled boardroom like a blade wrapped in silk, sharp but controlled, and for a moment no one moved. No one even breathed, because just seconds earlier, the man standing near the far end of the polished oak table had been invisible, just another maintenance contractor in a faded gray shirt, sleeves rolled, hands marked by years of quiet work, the kind of man people looked past without thinking. The kind of man people joked about when they thought he couldn't. Here, and they had joked. Oh, they had laughed. 3 executives trading quick glances, one whispering, "He probably doesn't even understand what we're discussing." Another smirking, "Facilities should stay in facilities." And the room had followed with polite laughter, the kind that echoes off marble floors and dies just as quickly as it rises. While Ethan Cole had stood there, still as a post, eyes steady, not angry, not embarrassed. Just present, like a man who had long ago stopped measuring himself by the noise of others, his toolbox resting quietly beside his boots, the faint hum of the overhead fluorescent lights filling the spaces between their words. And when Victoria Hale had first turned her attention to him, it wasn't curiosity, it was dismissal, the kind that comes from years of being obeyed without question. "You're still here," she had said, not unkindly, but not kindly either, just efficient, just final. Like closing a file, and Ethan had nodded once, slow, deliberate. "Just finishing up, ma'am," his voice low, even, the kind of voice that doesn't compete with a room, it settles into it, unnoticed until it matters, and that should have been the end of it. It usually was. Men like him finished their work, gathered their tools, and disappeared before anyone thought to ask their name. But something shifted, something small, almost invisible, like a current changing direction beneath still water, because just as he turned slightly toward the exit, a sharp tone broke through the room, not loud, but precise, a system alert from the company's aviation division dashboard displayed on the far screen, a string of coded signals no one in the room immediately recognized. The executives frowned. One leaned forward, tapping his tablet. "Is that a simulation glitch?" Another shrugged. "Must be. No one uses that protocol anymore." But Ethan paused, just for a second, his hand tightening slightly around the handle of his toolbox, his shoulders still relaxed, but his attention drawn, pulled by something deeper than curiosity, something practiced, something trained. And then it happened. Not dramatic, not loud, just a single breath, and under it, almost to himself, he spoke. "Falcon 7, confirm vector." The words barely above a whisper, but clear, precise, weighted with a rhythm that didn't belong in that room. And that was the moment everything changed, because across the table, Victoria Hale froze, not metaphorically, not subtly. She froze, her posture locking, her eyes sharpening as if the world had suddenly narrowed to a single point. The air in the room thickened, the hum of the lights louder now, or maybe just more noticeable in the silence that followed. And when she spoke again, her voice was no longer dismissive, no longer efficient. It was something else entirely, something edged with recognition, something almost unsettled. "Repeat that call sign now." The room did not move. It tightened, like every inch of air had been pulled into a single point between them, and Ethan did not immediately answer. Not because he did not hear her, but because he understood exactly what she was asking, and more importantly, what it meant if he answered it again. One executive cleared his throat, forcing a laugh that did not land. "It is just jargon, right?" Another added quickly, probably something he picked up online. But Victoria did not look at them. Her eyes stayed locked on Ethan, sharp, searching, almost disbelieving. "I said repeat it," she pressed, slower this time. Each word measured, and Ethan exhaled quietly, a small breath that seemed to carry years inside it, his grip on the toolbox loosening just enough. "It is nothing," he said, calm, respectful, the kind of tone that usually ended conversations, but not this one. "Not now, no," she replied immediately, stepping closer, heels clicking once against the marble floor, the sound echoing, louder than it should have. "That is not nothing." The room shifted, chairs creaked, someone lowered their tablet. Another leaned forward, curiosity replacing amusement, and for the first time since he had entered, Ethan lifted his eyes fully to meet hers, not challenging, not defensive, just steady. And in that stillness, something unspoken passed between them, something that did not belong to corporate walls or quarterly reports. Something older, heavier. Falcon 7, he said again, this time clearly, not loud, but undeniable, and the effect was immediate. Victoria's expression changed, not dramatically, but precisely. The way a professional recognizes a detail others miss. Her shoulders straightened, her gaze sharpened further. That designation was retired 12 years ago, she said, almost to herself, then louder. It was tied to a classified air command unit. A murmur rippled through the room, low and uncertain. One of the senior directors frowned. Victoria, this is not relevant to the meeting. But she did not respond. Her attention was fixed, completely, entirely. Where did you hear that call sign? She asked, and this time there was no edge, only focus. And Ethan's answer came just as evenly as before. A long time ago. 3 words, simple, controlled, but they landed heavier than anything else that had been said. The silence that followed was different now, not awkward, not dismissive, but attentive. Like the room itself was waiting. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above them, a faint buzz that filled the space between breaths. And somewhere in the distance, a phone vibrated against the table, but no one reached for it. Victoria took another step closer, stopping just short of him, close enough to see the details others had ignored. The faint line of an old patch mark on his sleeve. The posture that was too balanced for someone who spent his days fixing vents and wiring. The calm that did not shift under pressure. That unit, she continued slowly, did not just disappear. It was reassigned after a mission that was never publicly acknowledged. One of the younger executives whispered, "What is she talking about?" But no one answered him, because the energy in the room had already changed, completely, irreversibly. Ethan did not confirm. He did not deny. He simply stood there, present, composed, as if none of this required explanation, and that, more than anything, unsettled them, because people who have nothing to prove do not rush to explain themselves. Victoria studied him for a long moment, her mind clearly working through something deeper than recognition, something personal, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but far more certain. There was only one pilot assigned that call sign at the end, she said, each word deliberate. And he was reported missing. The word hung in the air. Missing, not dead, not confirmed, just gone. And for the first time since she had taken control of the room, there was the slightest break in her certainty, a fraction of a second where authority gave way to something human, something searching. "So I will ask you one more time," she said, her voice steady again but softer at the edges. "Who are you, Mr. Cole?" No one answered her question, not because they could not, but because something in the room understood that the answer did not belong to them. It belonged to him, and Ethan did not rush to fill the silence. He let it sit, let it settle, the way a man does when he has learned that truth does not need to compete with noise. One executive shifted uncomfortably, tapping his pen against the table. "Victoria, we are getting off track," he said, trying to pull the room back into something familiar, something controlled, but she did not even glance at him. Her attention remained fixed, unwavering, and Ethan finally spoke, not louder, not defensive, just steady. "I am exactly who you see," he said, simple words, but they did not land simply. They carried weight, the kind that made people reconsider what they thought they understood. A quiet ripple moved through the room, skepticism, curiosity, disbelief, all mixing into something uncertain. "That is not possible," one of the directors said, under his breath. "You do not just walk away from something like that." Another added, louder this time. "People do not disappear from that level of command and end up fixing light panels." And for the first time, Ethan allowed the faintest hint of something to cross his expression, not amusement, not irritation, just recognition, like he had heard this kind of thinking before, many times. "People do not always end up where others expect," he replied, his voice calm, even the kind of calm that does not ask for agreement. It simply exists. Victoria took that in, studying him more carefully now, not just as a question, but as a pattern she was trying to solve, her mind clearly connecting details others had missed, the way he stood, the way he spoke, the absence of any need to defend himself. And then her gaze dropped briefly to his hands, rough, marked, but steady, no tremor, no hesitation. and something in her expression shifted again, softer this time, not weaker, just more precise. Why walk away? She asked, the question quieter, more personal than anything she had said before, and the room leaned in without realizing it. Because that question mattered more than the call sign, more than the past. It pointed to something deeper, something human. Ethan did not answer immediately. He let the silence breathe again, the faint hum of the building systems filling the space, a distant elevator chime echoing faintly through the walls, and when he finally spoke, it was not with explanation, not with detail, but with something simpler, because some things are not meant to follow you home. The words settled over the room like a weight that no one could quite define, and for a moment, no one tried to challenge it, no one tried to dissect it, because it did not sound like an excuse, it sounded like a boundary. Victoria's eyes held his, searching for something more, but finding only that same steady presence, that same quiet control, and it was that control that unsettled her the most, because it was not the control of power, it was the control of someone who had already faced more than this room could offer. One of the executives finally spoke again, his voice hesitant now, stripped of earlier confidence. If what you are implying is true, then why are you here? And this time, Ethan did not pause. His answer came without hesitation, without performance. Because my daughter needs a place that is steady. 3 words changed. The room again, not dramatically, but deeply. The tension shifted from suspicion to something else, something quieter, something that did not fit neatly into their expectations. Victoria absorbed that. Her expression no longer cold, no longer dismissive, but thoughtful, recalibrating. And for the first time since the meeting began, she stepped back, just slightly, creating space instead of closing it. Her voice when she spoke again was different, still controlled, still authoritative, but no longer distant. Ethan Cole, she said slowly, as if confirming something to herself. You are not here by accident. And he met her gaze with the same calm he had carried from the beginning, offering no denial, no confirmation, just presence. And in that presence, the room understood something they could not quite explain. The man they had overlooked had never been small. They had simply chosen not to see him, and now they could not look away. The silence did not break. It deepened, settling into the kind of stillness that makes every small sound feel intentional. The faint hum of the air system, the soft click of a cooling vent, even the distant murmur of voices from the hallway beyond the glass walls. All of it fading behind the weight of what had just been said, and no one in the room seemed quite sure how to move forward, because the structure they relied on, titles, roles, hierarchy, had quietly shifted without permission. One of the senior executives adjusted his tie, his voice careful now, stripped of its earlier edge. If there is a background we should be aware of, for security reasons, he began, choosing his words as if stepping across thin ice. Then it would be appropriate to disclose it. Ethan did not respond immediately, not because he was avoiding the question, but because he understood the intent behind it, not curiosity, not concern, but control, the need to put something into a category, to label it, to make it manageable. And he set his toolbox gently on the floor beside him, the sound soft, deliberate, final, before straightening again. There is nothing here that affects your operations, he said, calm, precise, leaving no space for interpretation. The executive opened his mouth as if to press further, but Victoria lifted a hand, not sharply, not forcefully, just enough to stop him. And the room obeyed without question, because authority, real authority, does not need volume. It simply exists. She took a slow breath, her posture no longer rigid, but aligned, focused, as if she had made a decision internally that no one else had yet caught up to. We are done with that line of questioning, she said, her tone even, final, and there was no resistance, not because they agreed, but because something in the room had shifted in her as well, something they recognized but could not define. She turned back to Ethan, her gaze steady, but no longer searching for proof, instead measuring something else entirely. You said you are here for your daughter, she continued, the question implied but not spoken directly, and Ethan gave a small nod. Not defensive, not explanatory, just acknowledgement. Yes, ma'am. 3 words, simple, grounded, and again, they carried more weight than expected, because there was No performance behind them, no attempt to impress. Only truth stated without decoration. Victoria studied that for a moment, then glanced briefly toward the large display screen where the earlier system alert still lingered, its coded lines unresolved, ignored by everyone else until now. You recognize that signal immediately, she said, turning back, her voice quieter, more thoughtful. Our internal team flagged it as a legacy glitch. One of the engineers at the table shifted slightly. Uncomfortable, we assumed it was outdated, he added, almost defensively. Ethan's gaze moved to the screen, not hurried, not dramatic, just attentive. And for a moment, he did not speak, he simply observed, the way someone does when they are not trying to prove they know something, but rather confirming what they already understand. It is not a glitch, he said finally, his voice low but clear, and the room leaned in again without realizing it. It is a fallback channel, he continued, old, but still active if someone knows how to reach it. A pause followed, short, controlled, but enough to shift the weight of the moment once more. The engineer frowned. That is not possible. That system was decommissioned years ago. Ethan's expression did not change. Not fully, he replied. And again, no argument followed immediately, because certainty, when it is quiet and consistent, has a way of disarming doubt. Victoria glanced back at the screen, then at him, her mind clearly recalibrating in real time. Can you access it? She asked, not as a challenge, but as a genuine question now, and Ethan did not answer right away, not because he could not, but because he was deciding whether he should. The room waited, every second stretching slightly longer than the last, and then he said, simply, yes. And that single word shifted everything again, because it was not said with pride, not with hesitation, just with quiet certainty, the kind that does not ask for permission. And in that moment, Victoria Hale, who had built her world on control, realized something she had not expected. The most capable person in the room was the one who had never tried to lead it. No one spoke for a moment after that, not because they had nothing to say, but because they understood, instinctively, that whatever came next would matter, and Victoria did not rush it. She stepped toward the console at the center of the table, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge as she considered the screen again, the coded signal still pulsing quietly in the corner. Waiting, show me, she said finally, not as a command, but as an invitation, and that alone shifted the energy once more, because it was the first time she had asked instead of instructed, a subtle change, but one that did not go unnoticed. Ethan did not move immediately, his eyes resting on the screen, then briefly on her, as if confirming something unspoken, not authority, not permission, but intent. And then he stepped forward, slow, deliberate, setting his toolbox aside without sound, the soft rubber soles of his boots barely echoing against the polished floor. One of the engineers shifted out of his seat, uncertain. He should not be interfacing with that system. He muttered, but no one stopped Ethan, not anymore, because doubt had already been replaced with something else, something quieter, something closer to trust. Ethan reached the console and paused, not touching it yet, just observing, the way a pilot studies a panel before takeoff, not out of hesitation, but out of respect for what it represents. And then his hand moved, not fast, not showy, just precise, his fingers navigating the interface with a familiarity that did not need explanation. One command, then another, each input measured, intentional. The room watching in complete silence, the faint clicks of the touchscreen, the only sound breaking through the hum of the building. That interface has not been updated in years, the engineer whispered, almost to himself, but Ethan did not respond, his focus steady, anchored. And then the screen changed, not dramatically, but enough, the coded lines reorganizing, aligning into something structured, something readable, a hidden layer revealed not by force, but by understanding. A soft chime followed, subtle, almost understated, but unmistakable, the system acknowledging access, and that was when the room truly went still, not out of confusion, but out of realization, because this was no longer theory, no longer assumption. This was proof, quiet, undeniable proof. Victoria stepped closer, her eyes scanning the updated display, her expression no longer questioning, but absorbing, processing. And when she spoke, her voice carried a different weight now. one that had shifted from authority to recognition. That channel was designed as a last resort communication path, she said slowly. Only a handful of pilots were ever trained to use it. Ethan stepped back slightly, giving her space, not claiming the moment, not holding on to it, just letting it exist. It is still active, he replied, calm, as if stating something obvious, and that calm unsettled them more than any display of skill could have, because there was no need in it, no need for validation, no need for reaction, just quiet certainty. One of the executives leaned forward, his earlier confidence completely gone now, replaced with something closer to humility. Why did no one else catch this? He asked, not accusing, but genuinely confused, and Ethan's answer came without hesitation. Because they were not looking for it. Simple, direct, and again, it landed heavier than expected. The engineer swallowed, glancing back at the screen, then at Ethan, as if seeing him for the first time, really seeing him. And Victoria remained still for a moment longer, her gaze fixed on the data. Then slowly she turned back to him, her posture no longer guarded, no longer distant, but aligned with something new, something earned. You just restored access to a system my entire team wrote off as obsolete, she said, not as a challenge, but as a statement of fact, and Ethan gave a slight nod, not proud, not dismissive, just acknowledging reality as it was. And in that moment, the room understood something deeper than skill, something beyond titles or resumes, the difference between knowledge and experience, between training and understanding. And as the silence settled once more, heavier now but clearer, Victoria Hale realized that what stood in front of her was not just a man with a past. It was a man who had chosen to leave it behind, and still carried it with grace. The room did not return to normal. It could not. Something had shifted too far beneath the surface. And even though no one said it out loud, everyone felt it. The quiet recalibration of respect, the subtle realignment of who understood what. Victoria remained still for a moment longer, her eyes moving between the screen and Ethan, not searching anymore, but measuring something deeper, something that could not be captured in credentials or titles. Lock that channel, one of the executives said. Suddenly, his voice sharper than before, trying to reclaim a sense of control. If it is still active, it is a vulnerability. Another nodded quickly. We should shut it down immediately. Their words came faster now, overlapping slightly. Urgency replacing earlier dismissal. But Ethan did not react. He simply stood there, calm, steady, as if the urgency did not belong to him. And Victoria raised her hand again, the gesture small but absolute, the room quieting instantly. No, she said, her voice even, grounded. And the resistance stopped just as quickly as it had started. She stepped closer to the screen once more, studying the data now with a different lens, not fear, not urgency, but understanding. You said it is a fallback channel, she continued, her tone thoughtful, meaning it exists for a reason. Ethan gave a slight nod. Yes, ma'am, he replied, and again, there was no embellishment, no attempt to impress, just confirmation. Victoria's gaze lingered on the display, then shifted back to him. And if it is still active, she added slowly, then someone, somewhere, still knows how to use it. The implication settled over the room like a low, steady pressure, not dramatic, not loud, but impossible to ignore. One of the engineers leaned forward, concern replacing his earlier skepticism. Are you saying this system could still be accessed externally? He asked, careful now, measured, and Ethan's answer came just as steady. If someone understands the protocol, yes. The room absorbed that in silence, the weight of possibility hanging in the air, not panic, not fear, but awareness, the kind that changes how people think without forcing them to admit it. Victoria took a slow breath, her posture aligning again, but differently this time, not from authority, but from clarity. Then we do not shut it down, she said, her voice firm, decisive, and no one argued. Not anymore, because her authority now carried something else with it, something informed, something earned in real time. She turned slightly toward Ethan, not fully, just enough to acknowledge him without placing him on display. We understand it, she continued. We monitor it, and we decide what it means. A pause followed, short but intentional. Then she added, more quietly, with the right guidance, And that was the moment the room recognized what had changed, not just in her, but in the structure itself, because she was no longer speaking around Ethan. She was speaking with him in mind. One of the executives shifted, hesitant. "You are suggesting we involve him?" he asked, the question careful, stripped of its earlier tone, and Victoria did not hesitate. "I am suggesting we do not ignore what is clearly in front of us," she replied, her gaze steady. And then she looked directly at Ethan again, not as a test, not as a challenge, but as a decision already forming. "You understand this system better than anyone in this room," she said, her voice calm, certain, "whether you intended to or not." Ethan did not respond immediately, not out of reluctance, but because he understood the direction this was moving, the shift from observation to involvement, from presence to expectation, and for a brief moment, the room held its breath again, waiting, because even now, after everything, the most important answer still belonged to him. And when he finally spoke, it was not with resistance, not with eagerness, just with quiet clarity. "Understanding something does not mean it belongs to me." The words settled softly, but firmly, and for a second, no one spoke, because they carried a boundary, a line that could not be crossed by authority alone, and Victoria absorbed that, her expression thoughtful, not frustrated, not dismissive, but respectful, because for the first time in that room, she was not dealing with someone who needed to be convinced. She was dealing with someone who had already decided who he was. And in that realization, the room grew quiet again, not with uncertainty, but with something far rarer, respect that had not been demanded, but earned in silence. The silence did not feel empty anymore. It felt deliberate, like every person in the room was choosing their next move more carefully than before, and Victoria did not break it immediately. She allowed Ethan's words to settle, to take root, because she understood something now that she had not understood an hour ago. Control was not always about directing people. Sometimes it was about recognizing where control did not belong. One of the executives shifted again, quieter this time. "Then what are we supposed to do with this?" he asked, not with authority, but with uncertainty, and that question hung in the air longer than expected, because for once, no one rushed to answer it. Not even Victoria. She turned slightly, her gaze drifting back to the screen, the restored channel still active, still present, but no longer just a technical anomaly. It was something more now, something that required judgment, not just knowledge. And when she finally spoke, her voice was lower, steadier. "We do not rush," she said, each word measured. "We observe." A simple directive, but it shifted the tone of the room again, from reaction to restraint, from urgency to awareness. Ethan remained where he stood, not stepping forward, not stepping back, just present. And that presence had become something the room now anchored to, even if they did not fully realize it. Victoria glanced at him briefly, then back at the others, set a passive monitor on the channel. She continued. No interference, no alerts triggered externally. The engineer nodded quickly, already moving to comply, but slower now, more careful, as if aware that he was handling something he did not fully understand. The faint tapping of keys replaced the earlier tension, controlled, methodical, and the room began to move again, but differently, quieter, more aligned. Yet even as systems adjusted and screens updated, the focus kept returning to Ethan, because he had not changed, not in posture, not in tone, not in presence. And that contrast, between his stillness and their shifting energy, spoke louder than anything else. Victoria turned back to him once more, her expression thoughtful, not probing, not demanding, but something closer to respect. "You said it does not belong to you," she said, her voice even. "But you understand it." A pause followed, not heavy, but intentional. "And right now, that matters." Ethan met her gaze, steady as before, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, because the exchange did not need words to carry its meaning. One of the younger analysts, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, his voice hesitant but genuine. "Sir," he said, addressing Ethan directly, not dismissively, not casually, but with something new. "If something comes through that channel, would you recognize it?" The question was simple, but it shifted the room again, because it was no longer about authority or hierarchy. It was about trust, and Ethan considered it briefly, not dismissing it, not embracing it, just weighing it the way he weighed everything else. And then he answered, "I would recognize the difference between noise and intent." The words were calm, precise, and they landed with a quiet clarity that no one challenged. Victoria absorbed that, her expression settling into something resolved. Not fully decided, but moving in that direction. "Then we proceed carefully," she said, more to the room than to him, but still aware of him. "We do not assume, and we do not ignore." The balance in her words reflected the shift in her leadership, subtle but undeniable. And as the systems continued to adjust and the room found a new rhythm, something unspoken settled among them. A shared understanding that this moment had changed more than just a meeting. It had revealed something deeper. Something about perception, about assumption, about the quiet strength of someone who does not need to prove anything. And as the noise of work resumed, softer now, more measured, Ethan reached down, picked up his toolbox, and without drawing attention, turned slightly toward the door, not as an exit from conflict, but as a return to where he had always chosen to stand, outside the need to be seen, and no one stopped him. Not because they could not, but because for the first time, they understood that stopping him was never the point. The door did not close behind him right away. It lingered slightly ajar as Ethan stepped into the hallway, the quieter world outside the glass walls greeting him with a different kind of stillness, one without expectation, without eyes measuring or voices analyzing. Just the low hum of distant conversations, the soft roll of a cart down polished floors, the ordinary rhythm of a building that did not know what had just shifted inside one of its rooms, and Ethan moved through it without pause. His pace unhurried, his presence unchanged, as if nothing inside that boardroom had altered the path he had already chosen. But behind him, inside that room, the silence had not lifted, it had only deepened. Victoria stood where she was for a moment longer, her gaze lingering on the door he had just passed through, not watching him leave, but acknowledging something she could not ignore. One of the executives cleared his throat. Tentative now. "Should we bring him back?" The question felt smaller than it would have an hour ago, stripped of authority, shaped instead by uncertainty. Victoria did not answer immediately. She walked slowly back toward the table, her heels softer now against the floor, her posture thoughtful, aligned with something internal rather than external. "No," she said finally, her voice calm, certain. "He is exactly where he chooses to be." And that answer carried more weight than any directive she had given that day, because it recognized something rare, autonomy that did not need permission. The engineer glanced at the screen again, the monitored channel steady, quiet, active. "We will keep watching it," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. And Victoria gave a small nod, her attention shifting between the system and the room, recalibrating, understanding, and then something unexpected happened. A soft notification appeared on the edge of the display, subtle, almost easy to miss. A new signal, faint but structured, not noise, not random. The kind of signal that did not appear by accident. The room noticed it all at once, a collective intake of breath that was not loud, but shared. The engineer leaned forward quickly, his voice lower now, careful. This was not here before, and no one questioned that, because they all knew what it meant. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Victoria stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus, the kind of focus that comes when instinct recognizes something before logic can explain it. "Do not respond," she said quietly, her tone steady, and no one moved to contradict her. The room watched as the signal held, steady, intentional, and for the first time since the meeting began, something else entered the space. Not uncertainty, not tension, but awareness, the realization that what they were dealing with extended beyond their control, beyond their systems, beyond their assumptions. And Victoria stood there, absorbing it, not reacting, not rushing, just present, because she understood now that the most important decisions are not made in noise, they are made in silence. And in that silence, her gaze shifted once more toward the door, just for a second, as if acknowledging a connection that had not been spoken aloud. Because somewhere beyond that room, walking down a quiet hallway, with a worn toolbox in hand, was the only person who would truly understand what had just appeared, and for the first time in a long time, Victoria Hale did not feel the need to command the next move. She felt the need to wait. The signal did not disappear. It remained steady on the screen, quiet but undeniable, like a voice that did not need to be loud to be heard. And no one in the room spoke for several long seconds, because they all felt it now, the difference between something random and something intentional. The engineer's fingers hovered over the keyboard, waiting, not acting, because for the first time that day, no one wanted to be the one who moved too soon. Victoria stood at the head of the table, her posture composed but no longer rigid. Her eyes fixed on the signal as if it were not just data, but a message that required understanding rather than reaction. Do not respond. She repeated softly, more to anchor the room than to instruct it, and the room obeyed without hesitation, because hesitation had been replaced with respect, and respect had been shaped by something they had all witnessed, a quiet competence that did not ask for attention, and yet had changed everything. Outside the room, the hallway carried on as it always did, the distant echo of footsteps, the low murmur of voices, the steady rhythm of a building that did not know. It had just become part of something larger, and Ethan walked through it the same way he had walked into the boardroom, unnoticed by most, unremarkable to those who did not know what to look for, his toolbox resting at his side, his pace steady, his thoughts quiet, but somewhere beneath that calm, there was awareness, not urgency, not concern, just awareness, the kind that does not fade once it has been awakened. He paused briefly near a window overlooking the parking lot, the afternoon light, stretching long across rows of cars, the sky wide and open above them. And for a moment, he simply stood there, still, present, as if listening to something beyond sound. Back in the room, the signal shifted slightly, not in strength, but in pattern, a subtle change that drew the engineer's attention. It is repeating, he said quietly, more to confirm than to announce. Victoria stepped closer, her eyes narrowing just enough to focus. Not with tension, but with clarity. Log it, she said, her voice steady. Every sequence. The engineer nodded, already moving, his earlier confidence replaced with careful precision. And as the data began to record, the room remained silent, not out of uncertainty, but out of understanding, because they all knew now that this moment was not about action. It was about recognition, and recognition requires patience. Victoria glanced once more toward the door, not expecting it to open, not expecting him to return, but acknowledging that the answer they needed did not belong to the room. It belonged to the man who had chosen to walk away from it. And that realization did not weaken her authority, it refined it, because true leadership is not about having every answer. It is about knowing when to wait for the right one. Outside, Ethan adjusted his grip on the toolbox and continued down the hallway, his phone vibrating softly in his pocket, a small, ordinary sound that contrasted with everything that had just happened. He glanced at it briefly, a simple message from his daughter asking if he would be home in time for dinner, and for the first time since the boardroom, something in his expression softened, not dramatically, just enough. He typed a short reply, "I will be there," and slipped the phone back into his pocket, his steps never breaking rhythm, because for him, that was the only timeline that mattered. Not signals, not systems, not recognition, just the quiet promise of showing up where he was needed most. And back in the boardroom, as the signal continued to repeat in steady intervals, something else settled over the room, something deeper than tension, deeper than curiosity, a silence that was no longer empty, but full of understanding, the kind that does not need to be spoken, because it changes the way people see, the way they listen, the way they lead. And in that silence, one truth became clear without a single word being said. The strongest presence in the room had already left, and yet somehow, it was still guiding everything.